The following presentation is sponsored by PVA, the Paralyzed Veterans of America. Quickie GP wheelchairs were provided by Quickie Designs. This video has been produced in cooperation with the National Wheelchair Basketball Association and Wright State University.
Hello, I'm Andy Fleming, Sports and Recreation Director for the Paralyzed Veterans of America. As the nation's largest sponsor of wheelchair sports, PVA is proud to bring you this video on wheelchair basketball. Today, wheelchair basketball is the most popular and widely organized of all wheelchair sports. PVA members helped start the sport more than 40 years ago in Veterans Administration hospitals and have supported its growth ever since. For well over a decade, PVA has been the largest sponsor of the National Wheelchair Basketball Association through our annual support of the National Wheelchair Basketball Tournament, and more recently, the NWBA PVA National Basketball Camp. PVA also publishes Sports and Spokes, the leading magazine devoted to wheelchair sports and recreation. This video is one part of a three-part package on wheelchair basketball. The complete package includes a 2-volume videotape set plus a 145-page manual. Volume 1 of the video covers individual skills and drills. Volume 2 shows team play, building on the fundamentals of offense and defense described in Volume 1. The manual covers the topics shown in the videos in greater detail. Other subjects covered in the book are psychology, nutrition, and practice organization. I encourage you to order the entire set available through PVA. One concept you will learn about in the book and in both tapes is the read and react offense. This system has no predetermined plays. It requires that each player understands the game well enough to see what is happening on the floor and to make the correct moves to exploit defensive weaknesses or other opportunities. It goes beyond the set plays and patterned offenses used by many teams. You now have the best training guide to wheelchair basketball available today. I hope you enjoy this video and benefit from the skills and concepts it explains.
The National Wheelchair Basketball Association recognizes approximately 25 conferences throughout North America. A unique conference within this association is the Central Intercollegiate Conference. This conference, which consists of teams adhering to NCAA eligibility guidelines, continually has changing rosters consisting of players with a variety of playing skills and experience. As a result of this annual challenge, a need was perceived to develop teaching skills and instructional strategies to more effectively teach the complexities of the game of wheelchair basketball. This videotape is the product of the cumulative experiences of 3 coaches from Southwest State University, University of Illinois, and Wright State University, and the coaches' desire to share their philosophy, strategies, and tactical insights on the sport of wheelchair basketball. In Volume 1, these coaches will present their philosophy and the fundamentals of individual offense, common pick mechanics, individual defense, and selected drills. The coaches are Dan Burns at Wright State University, Dayton, Ohio, Brad Hedrick at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and Lou Shaver at Southwest State University, Marshall, Minnesota.
Certainly as professional coaches and administrators and educators in sport for the disabled, we're very deeply committed to promoting athleticism within the sport of wheelchair basketball. And I know collectively we recognize that an athlete is someone who desires to achieve his or her potential in a sport. And I think that we are very sincerely hoping that the outcome of this effort will be that it will provide a vehicle for individuals who want to be athletes in the sport of wheelchair basketball and who really want to achieve their potential to do so.
And I think one of the keys in promoting that is development in terms of fundamental techniques, fundamental knowledge, both individually and then collectively as a team, and then somewhat, I guess, globally, that all of wheelchair basketball might also be enhanced through that type of development.
I think another area that I think is real important, I think we all share this, is that we're really trying to teach players how to play the game. It's not so much learning a number of set plays or understanding the X's and O's, but really understanding what to do and when to do it and why you're doing it.
This project reflects a coaching style which emphasizes behavioral orientation in coaching as opposed to an outcome orientation. I feel that outcome-oriented players and coaches are a bit too prevalent in the sport, in that we don't really concern ourselves with how a person gets to a certain point so long as the outcome was good. And the problem is that if they're fundamentally unsound in getting to this outcome, it's very likely that the outcome was a function of luck or of something that was uncontrolled by the athlete. And so we emphasize doing it correctly, and we'll let the outcome take care of itself. If a person needs to, when an athlete needs to learn to have, an athlete needs to acquire a left-hand shot on the left-hand side of the basket. Subsequently, we won't let them skirt that. We'll force them to develop that left-hand shot on the left-hand side and take the emphasis off whether it goes in or misses. Because ultimately, we know that if they're fundamentally sound with this orientation, the overall impact will be positive, and it will ultimately help them achieve a higher level of play.
Yeah, I think that has some direct application in our own areas as collegiate coaches, because the kind of players we get have minimal experience, and the skills that are there are not well developed yet. And taking a behavioral orientation to our coaching and teaching allows us to develop our players, I think, much more adequately than basing all of our success on a win-loss, type of record. And that does not mean that we are not interested in the winning and losing aspect of wheelchair basketball. That has tremendous importance in all of our programs. But in terms of our daily practices and evaluating games, understanding how well we played or how well we practiced is something we really try to impart in our players.
I think that probably is summarized in the old adage, if you don't plan where you're going, you're probably going to wind up someplace else. And I guess what we're attempting to do is to provide that vehicle, provide a modality where we've analyzed the game. I don't think we're trying to promote in terms of that this is godlike. We all continue to share, we all continue to learn, but that there has to be a genesis. There has to be a basic resource of knowledge, and that this has been one of the areas that we have seen that there's a deficit. So practice then becomes so very, very important to what it is we're doing. We need to emphasize what that means in terms of, and I think that's what we're attempting to do.
When you talk about the importance of practice, I think we have to note that we, as collegiate coaches, again, have the luxury of being able to practice 5 times a week. And we're able to develop skills probably more quickly that way, and understanding the strategies of the game. And we understand that with community-based teams, that practice time is often less available. And I think then your practices even become more important, because you're only getting together 2 to 4, maybe 5 hours a week, and you really have to make your practices organized. You have to be ready with a plan. And on the community level, that's so much more important.
That's true. Planning and a goal orientation on behalf of the individuals on the team and the team as a unit. Too often there's controversy in basketball teams. Of course, it's easy to not have controversy in individual sports, but in basketball we have a collection of individuals. Oftentimes at the community level, it's a myriad of interest and abilities, and the teams have to collectively analyze what the individual and team goals are based on the individual goals, and come up with a set of team goals that they can then use to direct the practices and to set up the competitive schedules and to make it to give them an opportunity to experience success in relation to their goals.
And I think, though, an important concept of that is that as people practice, they have to understand that a chaotic practice or a chaotic skill development process is going to produce a chaotic ball game or a chaotic type of individual. So there was the saying that, practice makes perfect. I think we have to modify that a bit. I think we have to say that practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. And so if we allow our scrimmages, if we allow our practices, if we allow our individual workouts to be chaotic, to not be skilled, to not be fundamentally sound, then one learns that skill predicated on that process. And I think what we're seeing is in wheelchair basketball for a period of years, this is how many of the players or some of the players have developed. They've developed on their own, and they've developed well in terms of that particular component. But now we find that when they learned it, it became permanent, and now we're trying to suggest that there's an appropriateness to that. And it's going to be very difficult for some of these kinds of players that have been playing 5, 10, 15 years, that have developed these patterns, and so therefore now they're going to have to work harder. They're going to have to reevaluate, they're going to have to retrain, and that's going to be very, very difficult. And I think we really understand that. We're educators, we're teachers, and we understand that when something is learned and it's become permanent, that to unlearn it, to retrain, is very, very difficult. So this is not something that's going to happen in a day, in a month, in a year, maybe even in 2 or 3 years. It's something that's going to take a great deal of dedication, and it's going to take an effort on their part.
And I think we're addressing the quality there, and I think you have to understand too that it's necessary to look at your development in terms of your commitment year-round. And we're seeing that in order to really enhance your skills individually or as a team, that if you can get together as often as possible, your improvement will be much more dramatic and much greater. And I think we're seeing wheelchair basketball, the skills there and the team play improving year to year. And I think that's because there are certain individuals and certain teams who spend time outside of the basketball calendar playing and practicing and refining and working on their development. And so that commitment now is almost year-round, and you have to start looking at that in terms of your own development and your team's development.
I think probably we'll all agree that the favorite saying of all community teams is the let's scrimmage kind of perspective on practice. And ties in very well with Lou's statement on practice making permanent. And I think the problem with scrimmages is twofold. One, the people that are playing and the coaches that are directing the scrimmages oftentimes simply have never been taught or have never had an opportunity to access media to be taught how to structure a practice or what are the proper fundamentals of the sport. It's not that they're not eager to learn that and introduce it and implement it in their practices. They're merely naive as to how that should be done. And of course the practice session that emphasizes scrimmage just introduces too many concepts to the players for them to be able to grasp any one of them and appropriately assimilate it into his or her game. We of course would like to see our practices run more with drills which can break the fundamental parts of the game down into individual units and teach these very specifically. It's very difficult sometimes to understand just generally when someone says set a pick, what that pick involves. There are many, many components that have to be done appropriately for a successful pick to be performed. And so we're advocating that they learn to teach these skills from a very specific mode and then ultimately generalizing to broader and broader levels of understanding in a sort of a whole part, whole concept of teaching. And I think introducing this to wheelchair basketball instruction is going to elevate the overall level of play and understanding in the sport.
Yeah, I think the other negative aspect of just a scrimmage philosophy, and Brad, you mentioned the chaotic nature of, overwhelming nature of responsibilities, in terms of just scrimmaging. But when you think about it, you look at scrimmaging, you have one ball and 10 people, and I would think that if you put a clock on the ball handling skills and the times you handle the ball, that would be minimized. And after all, once you know how to do a skill, to develop that skill is just repetition, repetition, repetition. And that is minimized in a scrimmage situation. You may only handle the ball 10 or 15 times. And if that's all the time you have to handle the ball and develop your skills, well then I don't think those skills will be enhanced as well as if you would use some drills and some situations to enhance overall development.
So in essence, what we're saying is this is an effort on our part to produce some sort of media, some sort of resource bank that teaches the how and the why, and in essence, how to read and how to react in game-like situations.
Basketball teams need very sound, fundamental offensive players. After all, the name of the game is to put the ball through the hoop. Very good offensive players are not born. They start with the rest and finish in a different league. Very good offensive players become so because of an attitude they possess. They believe that they can achieve the good offensive skills necessary to play the game of basketball if they work hard enough and if they work long enough. With this type of thinking, they'll spend hours working on the hundreds of rhythmical moves needed to push a chair, pass, dribble a basketball, or shoot. Remember, individual offensive skills are the building blocks upon which good, sound team offense is based. Now Coach Hedrick will look at some of these individual skills.
Efficient wheelchair propulsion mechanics are essential for a successful participation in wheelchair basketball. There are 5 critical propulsion modes: forward propulsion, backward propulsion, stationary spinning, spinning while moving, and stopping. Now let's look at each of these propulsion modes in terms of their individual mechanics, beginning with forward propulsion. To initiate wheelchair propulsion, the athlete places his hands at a point which is top dead center of the rear wheels. The fingers are wrapped around the hand rim, and the pad of the thumb is pressing down on the top of the tire. The thumb is not wrapped over the tire, since on a reversal move, it could be jammed into the back post of the seat, causing an injury. The elbows, shoulders, and hands are all in alignment. This keeps the arm in a single plane, which is a more effective lever than when the elbows are extended outward. The shoulders are kept over the point of contact on the wheel throughout the propulsion cycle. This is done with trunk flexion. Additionally, the athlete attempts to keep his head upright to see the action on the floor at all times. Note also that the athlete attempts to push at least through 1/4 of the wheel circumference. Now let's watch this action at full speed. Now let's look at some ways in which we can help individuals with poor upper trunk stability perform these mechanics. First, the athlete could use a belt or abdominal strap, as seen here, which wraps around the back of the chair and the athlete. Secondly, the athlete could simply introduce the use of a larger diameter wheel. In this case, the athlete is using a 24-inch wheel, and he could increase the diameter up to 26 inches. Finally, the athlete could introduce the use of increased seat drop. Note here that the height of the seat rail at the knees is higher than that at the back of the chair. This drop in the seat, forward to back, lowers the athlete in the chair, increases his stability, and affords him a greater arc to push on during propulsion. Now let's look at backward propulsion. Backward propulsion is especially valuable in three situations. First, on defense, when used in place of spinning, backward propulsion allows the defender to maintain constant visual contact with his or her offensive assignment. Secondly, on offense, when the offensive player is being fronted by a defender, backward propulsion can be used to execute a successful backdoor flash. And finally, backward propulsion is integral to a successful reverse pick. Now let's look at the mechanics of backward propulsion. Mechanically, the athlete begins with his arms extended and trunk flexed. Note that the shoulders are over the contact point again throughout the stroke cycle. All joints are in alignment. The shoulder, elbow, and wrist are in approximately the same plane. Now, in initiating propulsion, the athlete will use short, quick strokes. Because the steering wheels are in front, this is necessary to maintain control. Additionally, the athlete looks left and right at a high frequency, again, to note what kind of action is going on behind. Now let's look at backward propulsion at full speed. Now let's examine the mechanics of the stationary spin. To perform a stationary spin, the athlete extends the arm downward on the side to which he intends to turn. His opposite hand is positioned at 12 o'clock atop the tire. The athlete then pulls with the extended arm while pushing forward and down with the opposite arm. He follows through with the pulling arm by extending at the elbow and pushing down once his hand passes the top of the tire. Now let's look at a stationary spin at full speed. To perform a moving spin, the athlete will reach down on the wheel on the side to which he intends to turn, keeping the shoulder over the contact point on the wheel. As he pulls back, he will lean rearward and to the side of the wheel which he is pulling back on to increase traction on this wheel and to decrease slippage in spinning. Once the athlete achieves the desired direction, he will push forward on that wheel with one hand or perhaps use both hands to then take the direction in which he wanted to go. Let's look at this movement in a walkthrough. Now let's look at this movement at full speed. The ability to stop the wheelchair is another essential propulsion skill. To stop the wheelchair, the athlete should reach forward with both arms as low as possible and pull back on both wheels concurrently. Individuals with high levels of lesion or great upper trunk instability should lean back in the chair when reaching forward to stop, so that the stopping action does not cause them to fall forward in the chair upon attempting this maneuver. Now let's look at stopping in a walkthrough. Now let's look at stopping at normal speed. Dribbling is a unique skill in wheelchair basketball because the arms are used to provide impetus for movement and simultaneously are used to handle the basketball. Now in dribbling, the wheelchair athlete wants to maximize the time of which both hands are available to propel the chair. There are two techniques which can be used which allow this to occur. The first involves the use of the lap to carry the ball when dribbling and propelling the chair. And the second technique is concurrent in that the ball is being dribbled while the chair is being propelled. In describing the lap technique, it's important to realize that at no time should the athlete have to look at the ball when bouncing it. The eye should be tracking the floor, watching the game in progress, and dribbling should be, in fact, second nature. The bounce should occur to the side of the chair by the front caster with as little spin as possible, and then retrieved immediately to the lap for the next two pushes. Either hand should be used so that the ball can be bounced away from the defender. Also, the player must be aware of the location of defensive players because it is very susceptible to being stolen when placed in the lap. Now let's look at a full-speed example of this technique. To perform the dribbling technique, where the ball is dribbled and the chair is propelled simultaneously, the athlete first puts the ball into a dribble to the side and forward of the wheelchair with a slight backspin. The ball is bounced far enough ahead of the athlete while moving to allow two pushes to be taken. Upon gaining possession of the dribble, he then puts it back into another dribble and can take two more pushes. When recovered, the ball should be recovered at a height no lower than the waist. Individuals with trunk instability may want to bounce the ball harder to get a higher bounce and allow recovery at a higher level. We advise that athletes, although they can put the ball farther forward and take more pushes, not do so because that constitutes a great loss of control. An athlete who is only two pushes away from the ball is under much greater control of the ball. Now let's look at this dribbling technique at full speed. In order for the offensive player with the ball to keep constant pressure on the defense and to take advantage of defensive miscues and or bad positioning by the defense, it's important that that offensive player be capable of stopping and or changing directions without spinning and turning his or her back to the defense. The bounce stop is an important maneuver in that it accommodates this action. To execute a bounce stop, the athlete will put the ball into a dribble by the rear axle, reach forward with both hands, pull back on both wheels, and then extend the arm to catch the ball. Let's look at this maneuver at full speed. The bounce spin is an individual ball handling skill that allows a stationary offensive player handling the basketball to quickly change directions while holding the ball away from the defensive player, thereby protecting it from being stolen. Mechanically, to execute this maneuver, the player with the ball will bounce it outside and in a plane even with the axle of the rear wheel. He will then reach forward with the hand on the side to which he's bounced the ball with the opposite hand at 12 o'clock. The extended arm will pull back while the arm on the opposite side pushes. once the foot plates have passed beneath the ball, which should be at its apex, the hand which is now on the side the ball is on will be extended and catch the ball. At that point, the ball can be placed into a dribble and the athlete could drive in the opposite direction. Let's look at this maneuver at full speed. Now let's watch how this maneuver can be used effectively to evade an overplaying defensive player. In this situation, the defensive player is overplaying to the front of the offensive player. Now we'll show you how the bounce spin can be used to evade this defensive player and achieve an easy score.
Passing, in addition to propulsion, shooting, court awareness, or that mental aspect of the game, is a critical factor in the development of any basketball player. Let's take a look at 3 basic passes. The first pass we'll consider is the two-hand chest pass. Now note the player has the ball with the hands on either side of the ball. The fingers are relaxed but spread along the side of the ball, with the thumbs running somewhere along the seam of the ball in about a 45-degree angle to the hands. But again, nice and relaxed. The pass itself is then executed with a bit of backward momentum toward the player. The arms and the elbows are in tight to the body without exaggerating, again in a relaxed position. Then with full extension, and then with the release of the ball, the thumbs will rotate down toward the floor. This gives a backspin to the ball. This is important in throwing the bounce pass as well as helping soften the ball. So the pass would look like this, somewhat in a slow fashion. And now a bit quicker. Notice the extension of the hands and the thumbs rotating down toward the floor. Now also notice her catching action. Her hands are relaxed, the fingers are spread. We teach the catching action along with all of our passing action. Notice the give as she catches the ball to soften the momentum of the ball. Thus it can be described that in catching, we somewhat reverse the passing action. Now, the second pass we will consider is the one-hand baseball pass. In the one-hand baseball pass, we stress that our players must learn this pass both dominant and non-dominant hand. In this particular instance, for instructional purposes, the player will demonstrate a left-handed baseball pass. Note the way she has the ball in the hand under control on the pads of the hand. Now, you find that for players with higher lesion injuries, they may have to stabilize off the other side of the chair in order to execute this particular pass. For those players that are able, we find that the other hand, though, can be used to guide this pass, much very similar as in shooting. With the ball securely in the hand, on the pads of the hand, the ball is now reversed and brought to a position where it breaks the plane behind the ear. The distance that the ball is being thrown will dictate how far back and how much momentum then the ball must receive in order for the pass to be executed. Then with the elbow leading, the hand and arm is extended and a follow-through with the fingers pointing, notice, almost directly down to the floor. Again, this puts a backspin on the ball. The player will demonstrate several of these passes. Left, and then right-handed. Once again, notice the catching action. The hands are relaxed, the fingers are spread, there's a give to soften the ball's momentum. In other words, once more, there is a reverse pass action. The third pass that we introduce very quickly to our players is the hook pass. Once again, we stress skill development in the dominant as well as the non-dominant hand. In this case, once again, the player will be executing a hook pass with the non-dominant hand or the left hand. The ball is positioned out from the body with the arm extended but not in a stiff position. Again, depending on the length of the pass would determine how far the extension is in terms of down to the floor to add the impetus or momentum to the ball. Once again, notice the ball is securely in the palm of the hand, not out on the fingertips, not directly into the palm of the hand, but on the pads of the hand. Then, with an upward motion of the ball and in an extension pattern, the ball is brought up over the head, and then with the follow-through, notice the follow-through comes up and over where it almost touches the opposite ear or touches the opposite shoulder. The player will now demonstrate several of these passes.
In running the read and react offense, the offensive players are always attempting to take advantage of defensive miscues and or poor positioning, or they're attempting to create defensive miscues and poor positioning through the movement of their wheelchairs and the ball. In regard to the latter movements, offensive fakes can be very effective means of getting the defense out of position. In executing a good offensive fake, the defender is moved out of position such that he or she cannot impede or prevent a specific offensive action, such as a pick, a flash, a pass, a shot, or a post-up, through the use of movements with the head, the eyes, the shoulders, the upper trunk, and the arms with minimal movement of the wheelchair. It must be remembered that every inch that the wheelchair moves away from the direction you intend to go is an inch you have to come back in order to go in that intended direction. We want to minimize that movement away from our intended direction in the execution of our offensive fakes. Now let's do a walkthrough of a wheelchair fake without the ball. In this situation, the offensive player in blue is going to use an offensive fake to the inside to misdirect the defensive player in gold and then drive to the outside. He will approach the defensive player and will use upper body movements and a slight chair movement to turn the defense. Once his back turns, the offensive player will redirect himself to the outside and drive around the defense. Now let's look at this offensive faking movement at normal speed. Offensive fakes can also be given with the ball. Usually, these occur in the form of a shot fake or a pass fake. These fakes are used by the offensive player to get the defensive player to lift his or her hand off a wheel. In doing so, the defensive player is vulnerable to an offensive move. There are two basic forms of ball fakes. The first occurs when the offensive and defensive player are facing in the same direction. The second form occurs when the two players are facing in opposite directions. Now let's look at the mechanics of a fake that can be used when the players are facing in the same direction. This same direction fake will be made using a passing fake with the outside arm and a crossover spin. Now let's look at a same direction fake where the offensive player uses the inside hand to give a shot fake and then reverses action. Now let's look at the mechanics of oppositional offensive fakes. Facing in opposite directions, the offensive player will give a shot fake and then drive to the basket when the defender's hand leaves its wheel and goes into the air.
Securing possession of a ball on the floor requires proper chair positioning and proper hand-arm technique. Let's take a look at this offensive skill more closely. Our first concern then is the position of the chair. We ask our players to face the ball and approach the ball so that the chair comes up alongside of the ball. We don't want our players to front the ball. The player should then lean as far over sideways so that he or she is able to press the ball against the bottom of the rear wheel. The hand should be placed on the outside and as far under the ball as possible, and the ball pressed into the wheel. The rotational movement of the wheel will move the ball upward while being secured against the wheel. As the ball reaches the top of the wheel, the hand should be rotated underneath the ball in a supine or a palms-up position. In this fashion, then, the ball can be cleared from the wheel and secured safely. Finally, players' functional levels must be considered and accommodated, and balancing techniques can be used by the opposite hand, such as grabbing the seat post to provide stability while leaning. Now let's take a look at this offensive move at normal speed.
Ball protection is essential to successful offensive execution. To protect the ball, players must be proficient in holding the ball, dribbling, and passing with both hands. This allows the offensive player to keep the ball away from the defense in performing those maneuvers. Also, to protect the ball, they should look to keep the ball out of their laps as much as possible. The ball in the lap is vulnerable to being swiped or stolen by a defensive player. To protect it, the offensive player wants to try to keep as much distance between his or her chair and the defender's chair as possible. Finally, offensive players protecting the ball want to maintain positions which allow them to have full visual contact of all their interactional options. There are two techniques that we teach in protecting the ball. One is the tee-up maneuver, and the second is a crossover dribble. Let's begin with a look at the mechanics of a tee-up. In this situation, the offensive player with the ball has his back turned to three of his teammates and is being very closely guarded. Subsequently, he needs to perform a tee-up. To achieve the tee-up position, the offensive player begins by holding the ball in the outside hand. The offensive player then pulls backward on the rear wheel located on the side of the defender until the foot plates are pointed at the side of the defensive player's wheelchair. This relatively passive maneuver puts the greatest depth of the wheelchair between the defender and the offensive player, thereby keeping the defender at a greater distance. In negotiating this action, the offensive player must remember to dribble the ball after two pulls or pushes on the wheels to prevent a traveling call. Let's look at the mechanics of another ball protection technique, the crossover dribble. To demonstrate the crossover dribble in a stationary position, the offensive player will hold the ball in the outside hand away from the defender. He will then cross over his body with the inside hand to grasp the outside wheel. The player will then pull back slightly on the wheel for momentum in the spin. Let's now look at a crossover dribble at normal speed.
Shooting is obviously the most popular offensive skill in basketball. Before we talk about the one-handed shot, let's address the two-handed shot. We as coaches don't advocate the use of the two-handed shot, but we understand the need for that shot by novice players in the early stages of their development. If you have to use the two-handed shot, then we stress the use of the same mechanics that are incorporated in the two-hand chest pass. Obviously, the two-handed shot is done in a different plane. Now let's take a look at the one-handed shot. The first concern in the one-handed shot is the position of the shooting hand on the ball. We like our players to have their fingers comfortably spread on the ball. Even players with small hands with their fingers in this position are able to control the ball well. Next, we ask that the ball rest on the pads of the hand. We don't want the ball resting solely on the fingers or solely on the palm of the hand. Next, we ask that the ball be placed in the hand and the wrist cocked. It will look as if the ball is sitting on a table in this position. The position of the non-shooting hand, or what we call the guide hand, in the classic shooting form, is at the side of the ball. This provides to stabilize the ball in the shooting hand. Since the guide hand is used only to stabilize the ball, then if we need to, in wheelchair basketball, use that guide hand to maneuver the chair or to use it for balance in the case of higher lesion players, then that hand can be taken away and placed in the appropriate location on the wheel or the frame of the chair. The position of the elbow should be somewhere underneath the ball, and the elbow should be pointing at the target. If the elbow is flared out to the side, then that causes rotation in the shooting hand and then affects the flight of the ball. Let's look at the shooting action of the one-handed shot. The first movement is the raising of the upper arm by the shoulder. The next movement is the extension at the elbow. And this is followed by flexion at the wrist to give the ball its final impetus to the target. The shooting action then is, as a whole, is done in a smooth and gradually accelerating motion. In terms of chair and body position, we ask our basketball players to take a position that we call squaring up. In this position, the shoulder joint is exposed to the basket and the elbow is pointed in the general direction of the target. This makes the shot much easier because the arm is now free of the trunk. It is very difficult to shoot across the body, and for this reason we ask our players to learn to shoot with both hands from, obviously, both sides of the body. The primary areas to emphasize are, first, balance. We want the ball to be balanced well in the hand. We also want to talk about balance in terms of the body. We want the body to be securely positioned in the chair, and we don't want to take any shots out of balance. Next, we want that elbow somewhere under the ball in order to have straight alignment in terms of the overall shooting movement. Thirdly, we want the eyes on the target. We do not want to track the ball as it goes to the basket. Rather, we would want the eyes to remain focused on the target throughout the duration of the shot. And finally, in terms of the follow-through, we want that forward thrust of the hand and fingers to occur at the point of release.
The ability to set successful picks is perhaps the most critical skill to be acquired by offensive players in two-player interactions. Within the read and react offense, there are 4 picks which must be successfully learned in order to execute the offense appropriately. However, these 4 picks share commonalities. The first of these commonalities involves the action of the person setting the pick. The individual setting the pick must attempt to expand that zone between the 2 defenders by giving a counter move away from the defender whom he or she intends to pick. Concurrently, the offensive player for whom the pick is being set should give a counter move away from the approaching pick in order to, number 1, turn the defender's back to the imminent pick, and also to allow him or her to get his or her foot plates inside of the defender and preclude the defender from turning outside and stopping the pick. The person for whom the pick is being set must attempt to pass very closely to the back of the chair of the picker. In this way, by minimizing that distance, the opportunity for the defender to move outside and stop the pick is precluded. Also, a pick must be considered a silent assassin. A successful pick and a well-executed pick makes no noise whatsoever because it is set with the side of the chair. In setting a successful pick, the individual who is picking must attempt to maintain his position or her position on the line between the defender being picked and the basket until such time as the defensive player that was originally on the picker switches off to pick up the other offensive player. In the read and react offensive system, there are 4 basic picks that can be set. 2 of these picks are operated or executed in planes that run parallel to the lane or to the sideline of the basketball court. Those 2 picks are the low-high, which is typified by a low post forward picking for a wing guard, and a high-low pick, which is typified by a guard going down low to pick for a forward. There's also a pick that occurs in the plane that runs parallel to the baseline. That's called a cross pick and is typified by a wing guard and a point guard cross-picking for each other. And finally, there's a pick called a reverse pick, which can happen in either plane and is often used as a follow-up pick when the first attempt was not successful. Now let's look at the mechanics of the low-high pick. In a low-high pick, which runs parallel to the sideline, the player located closest to the basket in the low post will come up to pick for the player located farthest from the basket out on the wing. In executing the low-high pick, both players concurrently will give fakes away from the picking action. This allows the attack zone to be broadened, and it also allows the defensive wing to get an inside position. Once having made that move, the low post comes up, positions the chair such that his front caster is inside or in line with the back of the inside wheel of the player he's attempting to pick. By taking such an alignment, he overplays to the outside, which allows more room for the driving guard to come around and to rub off the defensive wing. As the wing drives around the pick, she cuts close enough to that chair to minimize the distance between the two, and again to help preclude the possibility of the defensive wing fitting through the pick. As she drives to the baseline, the player who set the pick tries to hold a line between the defensive wing and the basket till 10 switches. Once the defensive low post switches, the player setting the pick turns 90 degrees and turns to the basket. Now let's look at a low-high pick at normal speed. Now let's look at a low-high pick in an actual scrimmage. To set a low-high pick on the left side defensive wing, the low post on the left side will first give a fake away from the pick, and then will then move up and establish a position behind the defensive wing. Offensive player number 13 will concurrently give a fake away from this action and will then drive toward the baseline.
Watch your pick, watch your pick. You got a minute.
The high-low pick, which is also executed in a plane which is parallel to the sideline or the free throw lane, is typified by a pick wherein the player farthest from the basket picks down for a player closer to the basket, such as, in this situation, a wing guard picking down for a forward in the low post. To execute this pick, again, both players will give fakes away from the action, and the wing will drive down and pick for the low post forward, placing the caster behind the wheel, closest wheel, and allowing an overplay to accommodate the forwards driving around and screening off the low post defender. As the low post defender drives to the top of the key, the player that set the pick looks to the inside and, when clear, turns to the basket. Now let's look at a high-low pick at normal speed. Now let's see a high-low pick in an actual scrimmage. In this scrimmage situation, player number 24 will initiate the high-low pick by first faking away from the pick movement and will then drive down and position his chair behind the low post defender. Concurrently, the low post offensive forward will fake away from the movement and will then drive up toward the free throw line. When the defense switches, the player that sets the pick will drive to the basket. To execute a cross pick, which is performed in a plane parallel to the baseline, the point guard, number 42, will initiate the pick with a fake away. He will turn and approach the wing to set a pick on the defensive wing, number 32, by setting the right front caster in line with the back of the outside tire of the defensive wing. Concurrently, the wing guard, after giving a fake away, turns and comes behind the picker close enough to preclude the defensive player chasing between the two on the outside. Coming around the pick, she'll bring the defensive player over to the middle of the lane, and once that player has left the zone, the player that set the pick will turn to the basket and look for the ball. Now let's look at a cross pick at normal speed. Now let's look at a cross pick in an actual scrimmage situation. To set a cross pick on the right side defensive wing, the player at the point will first pass the ball to the left side wing, will then give a fake away from the direction of the pick, and will then move and position her chair behind the defensive wing. The offensive wing will concurrently fake away from the pick and drive around the pick. Once the defensive players switch, the player that sets the pick should be able to break open to the basket. Unlike the high-low, low-high, and cross picks where the offensive players are facing each other, a reverse pick occurs when the two offensive players ultimately begin the pick facing in the same direction. A reverse pick, additionally, can occur in either a plane that runs parallel to the baseline or to the sideline. In this reverse pick, the offensive guard, number 13, will fake away and drive to the inside of the defensive player, number 10, positioning her chair such that her inside rear wheel is just slightly behind the left wheel of the defensive guard. Number 42 will now give a push forward to fake, and then will pull back and spin in on the reverse. This action specifically will preclude the possibility of the defensive wing chasing on the outside and stopping the pick. As 42 reverses, he will move 10 feet away from the pick in an attempt to draw the defensive player number 32 away. Having succeeded in that, the player that set the pick can turn, go to the basket. Now let's look at the reverse pick at normal speed. Now let's look at a reverse pick in an actual scrimmage. Having failed in their attempt to set a successful cross pick on the right wing, the player that attempted the pick will now merely back up and reestablish her position between the defensive player and the basket. Once this position has been established, the offensive player for whom the pick was being set will give a slight fake forward, will then back up behind the defensive player, and then spin and drive opposite the pick. Once the defense switches, the player that set the pick will drive to the basket.
An important factor in playing successful basketball is playing good defense. We try to incite the same enthusiasm for playing defense as we do for, say, offense. There are two critical factors in playing good individual and team defense. First, you must work hard as a player and as a team, probably harder than you work on anything else in the game. Secondly, you must incorporate goals within your practice sessions and in game situations, very similar to your offensive goals that you use throughout the year. Conceptually, we're looking at team defense in two areas, both individually and from a team perspective. Strategically, we try to do two things. First, as a unit, we try to extend outward over the floor as far as possible. How far to extend is best answered by asking the question, does the extension hurt us or does it help us? Secondly, we try to, in an individual sense, stay as compact as possible within that extension so as to minimize offensive attack points. Understanding these concepts and applying these strategies will allow you to be successful in defensive play. Now, Coach Hedrick will cover the concepts and strategies involved in good individual defensive play.
The cornerstone of sound team defense is effective individual defensive play. Typically, we view individual defense as being a reactive activity on the floor. We've found it to be more effective to teach individual defense as being a proactive activity. Now, in introducing or trying to implement a proactive defensive philosophy, there are 5 principles that the players must introduce to their game. First, the player always wants to have a part of his or her wheelchair intersect the line between the offensive player and the basket. Secondly, the defensive player always attempts to play with a position that allows the side of the wheelchair to be between the offensive player and the basket rather than the front of the chair, which presents a much narrower profile and one that the offense can go around more easily. Third, the defensive player attempts to overplay one side of that line. In overplaying, the defensive player makes it more difficult for the opponent to move in one direction and can at the same time anticipate movement by the offensive player to the weaker side. Fourth, we ask the defensive players to utilize the philosophy of first retreating on the move of an offensive player, reading that move, and then reestablishing the defensive position. So the retreat, read, and react philosophy of defensive play. And fifth, we ask them to reestablish in such a manner as to prevent the offensive player from utilizing one move to reverse action. Now that we know these principles, let's view them being introduced in an actual man-to-man defensive situation. Note here that the defensive player has reestablished defense close enough to the offensive player to force either a spin and reverse or a backup move and a reversal. Now let's see this action at normal speed.
In teaching defense in wheelchair basketball, we have two critical concepts. The first is that we must keep our hands on the wheels. This may be the most single important concept that we can teach our wheelchair basketball players. The second concept deals with communication. We're going to deal with these two concepts somewhat concurrently. The hands on the wheels concept, after one has established proper defensive position, is the same concept as an able-bodied ball player leaving their feet. Once the hands are picked up from the wheels in wheelchair basketball, then one loses their means of propulsion. So this becomes a very, very critical issue in terms of playing defense. The communication aspect, what we attempt to teach is to be specific. It's as if you are broadcasting the particular play on a play-by-play concept. You're talking to your defensive people, your teammates, and you're using terminology that is very, very specific to your own particular defensive style. So, again, keep the hands on the wheels and communicate. Now, we'd like to take a look at these two concepts in game footage. Note the action of the defensive player in this sequence as the offensive player receives the ball. Listen to the communication as we isolate on this particular defensive player over the next few plays.
Way to go, kid. Way to go in the hole. Bring it in, go. Set it up. Get in. Get the ball. Pass. Up out. Shot.
Rebounding. Many times rebounding has nothing to do with size. It has to do with desire, it has to do with hustle, and it has to do with positioning. The proper positioning is to maintain a line between the opponent, the offensive opponent, and the basket, using the side of the chair to present as big an obstacle to that opponent as possible to the basket. Let's take a look at that particular position on the floor. You can see 52 has established a proper position. Next, what we attempt to teach is that when the shot is released, we get a call from one of the defensive people to yell shot. Now this alerts our defensive people that there is a shot. But what we don't want them to do is turn their head and follow the flight of the ball immediately. We want them to locate the opponent. We want them then to feel the opponent or to establish as light a contact as they can and maintain that contact. As they establish that position, then they locate the ball and finally secure the rebound. Let's take a look at this action in slow motion. Now let's take a look at this same action at full speed. That was a classic example of really the perfect rebound. We described the perfect rebound in terms of that we should be able to allow the ball to hit the floor, lie there for a few seconds, until we're ready to go pick the ball up. Now, let's take a look at this action during scrimmage. After the ball is shot on this sequence, watch the particular positions of these defensive players and then this particular player as they secure the rebound. It's a classic example of blocking out, allowing the ball to hit the floor, and then gaining possession.
The ability of two defensive players to successfully perform a defensive switch is critical to successful team defense for two reasons. First, man-to-man in a straight situation without a switch requires that the defensive team have better personnel, both stronger personnel and quicker personnel. Secondly, an offensive pick in wheelchair basketball is simply too efficient to allow a team to play straight man-to-man, in that a good pick can prevent defensive recovery. So the purpose of a defensive switch then is to allow two defensive players to exchange their assignments without conceding position to the offensive team. Now, in terms of the mechanics of a defensive switch, the first and foremost facet of successful defensive switching is constant quality communication. It's imperative that the two players on defense be in a continuing dialogue, expressing the movements of the offensive team, whom they are guarding, and what actions are necessary or imminent in their future play. Secondly, it's important for that defender who's guarding the offensive player attempting to set the pick, it's important for him to front the zone behind the player they're attempting to pick, to take away that pick and prevent the defense from splitting them. And finally, it's important for that player whom the defense is attempting to pick to back into the paint without reversing, without spinning in. In making this move, by backing into the paint, that defender can always maintain eye contact with their assignment on defense. Now let's walk through a defensive switch. Now let's look at a defensive switch in normal speed.
Big coming. Inside. Switch 32.
That's a successful defensive switch that precluded the offense from gaining access to the zone between the two defenders. Of course, the defense is not always successful in maintaining that position, and occasionally the offensive player is capable of getting into the attack zone between the two defenders. In that case, the player whom the defense is attempting to pick should spin to retreat into the middle of the lane. Now let's see that action in a walkthrough. Now let's see that action at normal speed. Because the defense in a two-man situation is not always capable of stopping the offensive team from setting a successful pick, it becomes important that the defensive players on the help side of the court be aware of the action all over the court on defense and provide assistance to those sides where offensive picks have been set. Thus, we execute what's called a three-player switch. And a three-player switch allows the defense to stop a successful forward pick and only concedes the outside shot. Mechanically, in executing a three-player switch, we first have to have constant communication. Additionally, all the defensive players have to be cognizant of what's going on the floor. They have to be looking left and right, appraising the situation constantly to know exactly when an offensive pick has been set and who needs to execute the switches. Now, in the performance of this three-player switch, the individual that the offense has succeeded in picking should immediately spin and retreat into the lane towards the basket. The player who was defending the offensive player that set the pick should switch to the driving offensive player, and the defender who's assisting from the help side should pick up the offensive player that set the pick. That individual that was picked who retreated into the paint would then read and reestablish defensive position on the offensive player that was originally being defended by the help side defender. Now let's watch a three-player switch in a slow motion walkthrough. Now let's watch a three-player switch at normal speed.
Pick coming. Turn in. Switch.
Finally, let's see a three-player switch in an actual scrimmage situation. In this instance, the left side offensive wing will set a successful low-high pick for the point. Recognizing this, the defensive player on the wing opposite this pick will initiate a triangle switch. To do this, she will come over and pick up the offensive player that set the pick, and the defender who is picked at the point will drop off to the opposite side and pick up the offensive player for whom she had initial responsibility.
Drills, when utilized properly, can enhance the learning process. We believe there are 4 basic components to including drills into a systematic approach to skill development. First, they are essential. Second, they must have specificity. They must duplicate game-like situations. Attempt to include drills into your program which, in terms of floor play, more equate that play than just running through splintered or unrelated kinds of skill development. Third, intensity. The drills should be short, but of such intensity that once again they mirror a game situation. As a matter of fact, we advocate that the intensity should be such that it will be as difficult a particular period of time as they are likely to see in a particular ball game. And finally, they should be goal-oriented. The players should be taught not just to go out and shoot, or not just to go out and dribble, or not just to go out and push, but to have a goal in mind. If they're shooting, they want to shoot 50%, 60%, 70%. If they're pushing, they're wanting to do it mechanically correct so that they don't go out with a blank mind. They go out with something that's oriented in terms of, I'm going to get better, I'm going to progress. My skill level is going to be enhanced today because of what I'm doing now. And the most important concept, many times you hear, practice makes perfect. We'd like to discuss that for just a moment. We propose that practice makes permanent, that what you do and how you learn is going to establish that habit pattern. And so if you've learned something wrong, therefore it's going to be more difficult for you to correct it. So in dealing with drills, we stress that practice makes permanent. Thus, the skills must be done in terms of technique and methodology and the mechanics of the particular skill as correctly as possible. We do not allow our players to go through a drill using improper mechanics. So practice makes permanent. The 2-on-1 drill involves 3 players, 2 defenders, and 1 defensive ball player in a 2-on-1 fast break situation. We divide the drill into 2 particular segments, that in which we deal with the offensive movement and then that which we deal with the defensive movement and techniques. The 2 offensive players are taught to keep their space relationship as they come down the floor. Don't get much wider than the width of the free throw lane, as this places them approximately 12 feet apart. This then is going to split the defender. As they reach the free throw line, then the two offensive players will cut to the basket at approximately a 45-degree angle. And depending on who the defensive ball player has picked up, will make the proper pass, and then we should get a layup back in this area. Conversely, the defender will attempt to recognize which is the dominant player. Once this has been established, in an aggressive movement, we would like the defender to block off the dominant player, and after the layup then has been missed, then they can turn and secure the rebound. Now, we also stress proper mechanics in terms of passing and shooting. Let's take a look at a couple then of these particular sequences. Nice right-hand hook pass. Notice the left-hand shot and the securing of the rebound. Notice on this next sequence how the defender blocks off the offensive ball player, and after the shot is missed, secures the rebound. In a 3-on-2 situation with 1, 2, 3 offensive people attacking 1, 2 defenders, we teach the drill in terms of offense and defense. You can emphasize one day offense and the next day perhaps defense. We try to teach the drill in terms of its mechanics, both offensively and defensively. On offense, the person with the ball in the middle of the court continues down the middle of the court and will read the action of the two defenders. The people on the wings will parallel the individual in the middle of the court until they reach the free throw line extended. At that point, they will begin to cut toward the basket in an approximately 45-degree angle, and depending on what the two defenders then initiate as far as defensive actions, will read that action and make the appropriate move. Now, the two defenders, here and here, will attack the three offensive players aggressively. Their main purpose is to make them pass the ball. If they can make the two-pass situation occur, then they have attacked the ball in such a sufficient manner as to at least slow up the attack as far as the three offensive players are concerned. So we attempt to teach to the defenders to make the offensive people pass the ball. The two defenders can line up basically in two patterns. As you see in this particular pattern, this is a tandem position, one in behind each other. The other position that they can assume is a parallel position to the baseline, in which we have one defender in this particular area and another defender in this particular area. Now, the offensive people are taught to read this particular pattern and then to make the appropriate move. And there are two rules. The first rule is when the people on defense are in a tandem position, such as you see in this particular sequence. When this is read, the ball must immediately go to one of the wings. If the two defenders assume a parallel position, such as here and here, then the ball will stay down the middle of the court. These are the two rules that the two offensive players, or the three offensive players, are taught, and thus to make the appropriate action. Let's watch these sequences. With the defenders in the tandem position, the ball goes to a wing. The two defenders block off the remaining two offensive players, hoping that the shot will be missed and they can secure the rebound. With the defenders in a parallel position, the ball stays in the middle until the ball is attacked, and once again, a layup is secured.
This drill, the 3-on-2, 2-on-1 drill, is an extension of the 2-on-1 and 3-on-2 drills. It involves various aspects of full court play. You need a minimum of 5 players, but ideally 8 players are better for this drill. We have one rule for determining the lone defensive player on the 2-on-1 conversion to the other end of the court. And that rule is the player who shoots the ball or who commits a turnover retreats back on defense against the 2 new offensive players. As you can see here, the shooter retreats back on defense and will try to defend against the 2 offensive players in this transition. Some of the teaching points that we try to incorporate in this drill are encouraging appropriate offensive and defensive strategies and skills. Things such as finding the open player by the offensive players, making the appropriate pass, defending the better offensive player if given a choice, and having our players be in constant communication, both offensively and defensively, are very important teaching points that you can utilize within this drill. Finally, this drill, since it's full court in nature and continuous, provides great conditioning, and we will utilize this drill early in the season for this purpose.
The outlet drill is designed to teach players to release the ball as quickly as possible after securing a rebound. There are 4 players involved in the drill: the rebounder, the principal individual at this particular time, a shooter in behind the rebounder, and then 2 outlet individuals. Upon securing the ball, the rebounder will outlet the pass as quickly as possible using a hook pass with proper mechanics, both right and left hand. After the outlet has been made, then the players rotate clockwise. The rebounders goes to an outlet position, the outlet position to the shooting position over to an outlet, and the outlet position into the rebounding position. Let's take a look at the drill in action. Note the shooter puts the ball up for an easy rebound, and we have a right-hand hook pass as an outlet, a left-hand hook pass as an outlet, and we rotate. We don't want our players to rebound the ball and have to pivot any more than they have to. So we teach the outlet. That's their first initial move. Again, right and left-handed, utilizing good pass mechanics and also communication between the ball players. And we emphasize good mechanics on the pass. We also emphasize the communication between the players, calling of names, so that there's good recognition between the players.
The 11-man drill is yet another extension of our numerical superiority drills, and it involves even further many aspects of full court play. As named, the drill incorporates a minimum of 11 players, and 11 positions on the floor must be filled at all times. As you can see here, we have 2 players at outlet positions here and here. We also have 2 players and in defensive positions here and here. Additional players can be used by having them enter the drill at the outlet positions here. The next 4 positions that must be filled in this drill are at the other end of the floor and are similar to what you've just seen. We need to fill the outlet positions here and here, and we need to have 2 defensive players here and here. The final 3 positions are filled by 3 offensive players, as you can see here, in transition. Thus, we have 11 players in 11 various positions. The drill is a continuous 3-on-2 conversion situation with the addition of the outlet pass. We determine the 3rd offensive player on each transition by having the rebounder, and this can be either an offensive or defensive player, following their outlet pass, become the 3rd offensive player. The remaining 4 players who don't get the rebound go to any of the 2 defensive positions or 2 outlet positions. They decide amongst themselves who goes where. There are no out-of-bounds after made baskets, and all turnovers go immediately to the other end of the court. Since this drill is continuous, it is an excellent conditioning drill and involves a large number of players. It also involves all aspects of our transitional game. Finally, it also requires all of our players to play a variety of positions. The 34 drill is another numerical superiority situation drill. Basically, it involves 3 groups of 4 players, thus the name 34. Let's look at the positions necessary to run this drill. As you can see here, we have defenders, 2 defenders in the lane in these positions. We also will put 2 players as defensive players at the hash marks near the midcourt. The second group of 4 players will be set up in a similar fashion at the other end of the court. As you can see here, we will have 2 defenders in the lane, and similarly we will have 2 defenders at the hash marks in the midcourt area. If we have additional players beyond the 12 minimum required to run this drill, we will ask them to place themselves at one of the 4 hash mark defensive positions. In this case, at this end of the floor, additional players would line up behind these two defensive players. The final 4 positions are filled by offensive players in transition. We have 2 rules that we incorporate to run this drill effectively. The first rule allows our 2 defensive players at the hash marks to leave as soon as the outside offensive players cross their position, as you can see here. The second rule determines who goes back on offensive transition. This is simply done by having the 4 defensive players become the new offensive team in transition, and they proceed down the court and attack the same defensive situation as just occurred at the other end. The 4 remaining players fill one of the 4 defensive spots at that particular end of the court. This is determined amongst themselves. The primary difference in this drill from our other transitional drills is the inclusion of late arriving defensive players off of the transition and their effect on both offensive and defensive strategies and techniques. This again is a continuous drill and provides for great conditioning. It also involves a large number of players, which we as coaches like, since we can include as many players in a drill as possible. This drill contains all aspects of our transitional play. And finally, this drill requires that our players learn and play a variety of positions.
In this full court revolving layup drill, we initiate the action with 4 lines. We have 2 shooting lines over on the same side of the court going in opposite directions, and 2 rebounding lines on the other side of the court going in opposite directions. The only rule that the players have to understand is that, for instance, after shooting, this particular player then will come from out from under the basket, come around and establish a position then in the rebounding line on the other side of the court. After rebounding, the player then will return back to the shooting line. So it becomes a full court revolving layup drill. Let's watch the action. This is an excellent conditioning drill. We emphasize the shooting and passing mechanics, propulsion mechanics, and we also emphasize the mental and the physical aspects then of the game utilizing this particular drill. As you can see, the players are in rather constant motion, so therefore they have to remember rebound to shooting line. In order to reverse the drill so that now we shoot from one side as opposed to the other side of the basket, we just simply reverse the ball. We can follow one player now through the drill. He secures the rebound. Nice non-dominant hook pass as an outlet, assumes a position out at the other end of the court, and now will become the shooter, utilizing a left-handed shot. The caterpillar drill is a variation of many types of passing drills. It's two parallel lines facing each other, and after a two-hand chest pass in this particular instance, the player pivots to the outside and goes down the line and assumes a position at the other end. Thus, the line moves down the court, and the name caterpillar is applied to the drill. When reaching a predetermined distance, such as the end of the court, the action is reversed. Variations of the drill can include changing the particular pass, for instance, to a bounce pass from the two-hand chest pass. Can also be dominant, non-dominant hand. Could be the baseball pass, both non-dominant and dominant hand. And in this particular sequence, there's a different cutting action. It's an L cut. The player, upon releasing the ball, pulls back on the chair, pivots, and goes down the line and exchanges places in the drill. You will also note the communication pattern as the players release the ball, calling the name of the player that they're passing to and the player receiving the ball.
The formation for the four-corner passing drill is as follows. We will place four players 12 to 15 feet apart at the corners of an imaginary square. We'll have additional players line up behind each of these players at each of the corners of this imaginary square. A minimum of 8 players is needed to do this drill effectively. We start out with one ball. The passing sequence calls for 2 passes followed by an inside pass handoff. In other words, the player with the ball here will make an initial pass to her teammate. Then the ball will be returned to her as she moves toward that teammate with a second pass. And finally, a handoff will occur between the 2 players at this point of the drill. The moving sequence requires that the initial player with the ball to pivot and move toward her teammate while completing the required passes. Following the handoff, the player will go to the end of that particular corner of the square. So as you see here is a 2-pass sequence followed by a handoff. Again, the movement sequence is pass, keep your chair moving, move to the inside of your teammate and go to the end of the line. When we're able to handle one ball, we will add a second ball. This second ball increases the difficulty of the drill. As we can handle 2 balls effectively, we will add a third ball to the drill. Again, adding a third ball increases the difficulty of the drill and requires our players to be in more constant movement and to be more mentally alert. We will also build up to 4 balls eventually, which really increases the difficulty of the drill. We feel this drill is not only fun for the players, but tremendously challenging, as it calls for quick passing in a very confined situation, tremendous cutting and movement, and also, maybe most importantly, it requires great mental concentration and communication by our players. We'll utilize this drill throughout the season. and we'll also utilize it as part of our pregame warm-up. We use the change drill to provide a reaction situation that is not controlled. In other words, we try to include an element of surprise to develop greater alertness and better reaction to constantly changing conditions in a practice. We establish this by having our offensive players start to run their offense, and after a few passes, we will blow the whistle. Upon hearing this, the player with the ball drops it, and the closest defender converts it to offense along with his or her 4 teammates. The conversion takes place anywhere on the floor, so a premium is placed on both teams reacting quickly, as the offensive team is changing to defense at the same time. The one rule we insert in this drill requires that the offensive player picks up a player other than the player who was guarding him or her. This rule increases the need for quick reaction and effective communication, since the defensive team converting to offense will try to score immediately. We will use this drill in the half court, as you see here, in a 4-on-4 situation. We will also use it in a 5-on-5 situation or a 3-on-3 situation. We have also utilized this drill in a full court situation, and we will blow the whistle at any point during transitions or half court play. Again, talking is an essential part of this drill, and we find it really helps not only the communication amongst our players, but also their alertness and concentration.
The whistle drill can be used effectively to stop action, a particular sequence during your practice, and make corrections or make modifications. In this particular sequence, we're going to be working, first of all, just a half-court offense-defensive situation. The only rule that the players have to understand is when they hear the whistle, they must stop immediately, as quickly as possible, because then we're going to explain, or we're going to modify, or we're going to correct some kind of inappropriate behavior or some kind of mechanic or technique that perhaps wasn't performed correctly. So let's take a look at this on the floor.
Blue ball. Go. Come on, got bands.
All right. First of all, we got too much chair contact. All right? Too much chair contact. I heard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're trying to force everything. Don't try to force everything. 42, when you see that they've got you cut off, stop the chair. All right? Don't try to force it through there. You're not a tank. All right? Blue ball, back out again. All right, people, we're not getting any ball movement. We're not getting any ball movement. 33, you missed 2 people up here on passes. Get rid of the ball. Get rid of the ball. You know, you're not married to this. Get rid of the ball, people. Get rid of the ball. Don't sit here. You become the easiest person to guard, and then all these people have to do is just sag back in, all right? And we can't do anything. Move the ball, but move it appropriately. All right, still blue ball.
Go.
22, put the ball down on the outside of the wheelchair. See, people, we can't let you make these kind of mistakes. If in a ball game, 22 was here, and he puts that ball down, he puts it down right into 24, boom, and now they got a fast break. You've got to think, people, I don't care where you are, you've got to put the ball down away from the defender. We can't let you make those kind of mistakes. Now, that particular sequence was half court. Now what we can do is introduce a full court kind of play, and so we can begin to expand this. We can work 3-on-3, we can work 4-on-4. But what we attempt to do, again, is it's like a videotape. We stop, we freeze frame, and then we analyze it. So now we're going to take a look at this action where we're going to get a transition into it. So let's take a good look at it. Blue ball.
Transition now. Transition, people. Transition. I got two, Jeff Munson. I got it. Right, here we go. Blue ball. Nice one. Hit, Matt. Hit.
Just stop. Just stop. All right, now let's take a look. Transition. Blue. On the transition, everybody should have turned and just flown out of there. Let's take a look. Okay, good. Blue, we got 4 of you. All right, nice job. Okay, over here. 23. 23. Did you see him? Or were you looking down the floor? Why should you see him? Because we got a pick right here, right? We got a pick right here. All right? Do we have a pick anyplace else? No. Why? Because these people correctly, all right, popped out of there. Now let's try yellow ball. Go ball. Go ball. Blue, you're on defense.
All right, pick somebody up. Let's go. Can't go. Pull away. Head up. Stand shot. Go top. Slide in. Go, Jim. Okay.
All right, 24. If you're going to clear, son. Don't try to spin back. You just went out of bounds. All right, right here. Let's go blue ball out front. Come on. Blue ball out front. Come on, we want a shot. We want it shot. We're working on transition, people. All right? First time you get an uncontested shot. Goals, you ran around like chickens with your heads cut off. You had 2 or 3 chances. Get the ball up in. Let's go. All right, let's see what we got. All right, 24, you tell me what you're thinking.
Looking to back pick this guy.
All right, goal, is that correct? Is that correct? You bet it's correct. All right, check over your shoulders as you're going. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no? Where's the ball? Where's the ball? First rule in basketball, what? Don't lose sight of the ball. Don't lose sight of the ball. All right, let's go one more sequence, and let's put goal. Goal on offense. I got the ball.
Don't lose sight of the ball. Don't lose sight of the ball. Are you ready? Go. All right, let's go.
All right, we just made a terrible mistake. 34 forgets that he just went from offense to defense. He forgot. So what did he do? He went in this direction. Oh my goodness, people. Number 22. Did you see him do that? Because now he's easily picked. We've got to see that. He forgot just for a moment. See, a moment in time, he forgot he had just gone from offense to defense. Now look where he is. Look where he is. Look where 23 is. Ask yourself, why is 23 here? Did he do that too? We got to minimize those people. We got to eliminate those kinds of mental mistakes. Plus then, these people have to see that. They have to recognize it, and then they make the appropriate move. You've got to see this. You can't just let it happen. He's picked right now. He's picked right now because he made a mental mistake. All right, ball. So we can use the whistle drill in a 2-on-2, a 3-on-3, or a 4-on-4 situation. We can use it half court, full court, transition. And thus, the whistle drill can be used as a videotape to stop frame, make those corrections now. It becomes a very, very effective teaching tool.
In closing then, we have given you specific techniques and skills in what to do to become a better wheelchair basketball player.
It's not only important that the athletes know how to perform a specific individual technique, but it's It only has meaning when the athletes individually understand why this has a purpose and when and where to use that technique. And we would hope, as a result of this effort, that kind of understanding will be acquired.
And finally, we want to emphasize that good, fundamental, basic individual basketball leads to a collectively improved team effort.